Welcome to the DevLaunch podcast, bringing you insights from industry experts on how to grow the digital agency you love. Today's episode is all about going beyond client retention with account management expert Jenny Plant. We're exploring how to transform account management into a powerful growth engine, tackle common pitfalls, and create a culture of expansion within your agency. If you're ready to unlock new opportunities and future-proof your agency, stick around. This one's for you. Well, Jenny, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. You are an expert on all things account management, and I can't wait to dive in further.
Thank you for having me, Tony. No pressure on me now.
I mean, the bar is set a little bit high, but I mean, when you and I had our conversation earlier, I felt like I walked away with just so much more insight into not just account management, but thinking about holistic growth and some healthy growth trajectory for agencies. And so I'm really excited to dive in, to ask some probing questions, because you've got a pretty rich experience in this space. Would you mind walking us real briefly through why are we listening to you today talk about account management? What experience do you have that lends itself well to you having a lot to say about this?
Great. Okay. Well, I'm glad you got some value from our first conversation. I've been in account management in agencies since the early 90s, so over 25 years. So I'm a massive dinosaur, really. I worked my way up the ladder to end up as general manager of Publicis Life Brands, having worked in various agencies, as well as client side as well. I worked for an airline and a pharma company in marketing. So when I left Publicis in 2010, I did various kind of freelancing things, but then I settled on training account managers in account growth from 2016. So I've kind of worn the hat myself. I've got all the, there's not probably one shitty situation that I haven't been in with a client that I wouldn't understand. And also I've learned a lot through training predominantly account managers in how to grow existing business since 2016. And my training programs have evolved to kind of suit what I've uncovered.
Yeah. I mean, so you not only have you risen through the ranks, but you've also done quite a bit of training in this space. And so I'm a big advocate of where possible, train the stuff, because it's one thing to take your experience and try to distill it, but it's another thing to get it to the point where other people are receiving it and understanding it. So it takes a real deep understanding of the subject area to be able to teach it.
I think that's so true, Tony. And also, it's a passion of mine. I actually have found something in my life that I love doing. When I have participants that come through my program, I've walked in their shoes. I get it. And I want them to be successful. It might sound a bit cheesy, but I get a massive buzz from seeing someone implement what we're talking about, because it's all about action and getting a result, because there's inevitably a direct ROI.
Yeah. And one thing I remember from our initial conversation is maybe some missed opportunities when we think about account management. I think one of the things you told me is a big missed opportunity in account management is even just the way that we frame it and the way that we think about it. I think a lot of times we hear account management, we think about client retention and finding ways to make sure that we don't have churn in our agency clients. But one of the things that you teach on is that no, account management is actually a potential growth driver. If it's done right, it should and could be a growth driver for the agency. So with so many agencies that are being stuck in that mindset that account management is just about keeping clients happy, what do you think is the most significant missed opportunity for these digital agencies in account management? What do they need to kind of break free of with their mentality?
I think I use the analogy of a leaky bucket. We're all familiar with how expensive it is to get a new client. The Harvard Business Review says it's 5 to 25 times more expensive. Lots of other studies have shown that if you increase your retention rate by just 5%, you get between 25 and 95% profit. There's loads of reasons to keep and grow your existing client accounts. But the leaky bucket analogy is where, you get all that effort and time, you've got the client. Now they know, like, and trust you. You're doing good work for them. And why not stand back and think, well, how else could we be helping them? What other services could they be benefiting from? Can we ask them for introductions to other areas of their business? So, for example, if you're working with one brand manager, then, procurement love leveraging knowledge and work to work with other parts of their organization because they see it as a cost benefit. So, and also, like, who else could we be working with that the client knows, making introductions to other parts of their network? And what other, essentially, like, how else could we help? What other problems could we be fixing for the client? There's all of that opportunity, but rarely we have like dedicated time and a strategy to kind of address that opportunity. And that for me is the biggest missed opportunity.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, you're saying that, and it's actually bringing to my mind a client of mine. They've, I think, been very successful in their using account management as a growth driver because they typically work with larger companies, and like what you're saying, maybe they were originally engaged to work with one department, but because of how well they've been networking in with that client, they now have inroads into another department and another department. So even if you've tapped out your opportunity with this particular division, you can always move to other parts of the company.
Exactly. And, the typical agency business model is, not everyone listening to this will have a dedicated account management team, but they still perhaps want to capitalize on that opportunity to grow their existing accounts. So it's not that you can't still do that. The same like concepts and strategies apply. It's just for those companies that have a dedicated account management team, it's slightly easier because you have that one department that's focused on, creating a client development plan and a strategy, and actually executing on it. The exception to that is that where you get those account managers that have got that dual role themselves. So they're wearing several hats. So it might be the fact that they are wearing the project management and the account management hat. It could be that they are, writing as well, like they're copy generators as well as being a client management person. So there's always that, where am I going to have time for this? Because in order to grow an account, it's like making a new sale to an existing client. So if I want to talk to a client about a new project or how I can help them further, it's got to be relevant to where the client is. It's got to be fixing a pain point or helping them reach their goal. But if I don't spend time investing in what that goal is and what their problems are, then how am I going to come up with a meaningful solution? So there is an investment of time that's required to kind of grow an account in a meaningful way and to be business relevant. It's not about saying, oh, what about this? What about that? You could do this. That's selling stuff.
Yeah.
We've got to go through a process of understanding, is this solution, extra service, relevant?
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned, though, the piece about maybe even the people who are listening might not have dedicated account management teams. In fact, I was just having, I think the guest for the episode just prior to this one launching was talking to us about how they have what he calls a product manager. And this role essentially kind of sits between their software development team and then is also client facing. So there's a lot of client interaction involved in this one role. And as we were talking a little bit and uncovering like what all goes into that role, essentially one of the things that he talked a little bit about was, kind of some lightweight account management. And I think that's the reality with a lot of more boutique agencies is because they're not that big, they usually don't have the resources to have a dedicated account management team. In your experience in working with these different agencies, Do you feel like that's like the number one reason why account management is kind of just seen as client retention and not seen as a growth opportunity?
Possibly. I mean, nowadays, some of my clients are actually agencies that don't have a dedicated account management team. And it's up to several of the kind of middle management layer team to be responsible for account growth. So I have a couple of managing directors, I've got an agency owner, a lot of client services directors as well, who perhaps aren't, they're just in that kind of, they're responsible for the forecast, but they are not ultimately the ones at the coalface necessarily dealing with the client on a day-to-day basis. So it can be anyone. It just who is the person best placed in your agency to have this remit.
So I know something that we've talked a little bit about in our previous call is you talk about how a lot of times account managers or people who are playing that role of kind of account management, they're oftentimes seen as service providers, more transactional, and less so as like strategic growth partners. And so part of what I know you do is take people in that transition from more of like order takers to being kind of strategic consultants. So what are some steps that digital agencies need to be taking in order to empower their account managers or people sitting in that account management seat to become growth drivers?
Well, if we step back for a moment and just think about, because when I first started training this, Tony, in 2016, I thought, let's simply equip the account managers or whoever's responsible for the client relationship with some skills and they'll grow the account. But it's not that simple. And that also is a huge opportunity. It's like the tip of the iceberg. When you go underneath the kind of the waterline, the real, what agency owners really are trying to achieve is three things really. The first one is they want more predictable revenue, right? They want more predictable forecast. That's the first thing. The second thing is they want a repeatable process. They want a repeatable performance that doesn't rely on just one single person, because if that person leaves the business, then, and as we have project management processes, we should have an account growth process. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, and I think this is overlooked, it will give you a competitive advantage with your business if you can make your account growth process and the skills more systematic. Because ultimately, I think this is an opportunity to future-proof the business into the future. You know, we're being attacked by all sides, particularly with AI, you know, and the commoditization of what we do. So I think account growth and how we approach that really is, you know, an opportunity to future-proof the business. In terms of what can a person do, I think, again, it comes back to those, I call them three levers. One is for the person managing the client relationship with the senior leadership team to have a strategy. That's the first lever. And by strategy, I mean, it's deciding which clients are our growth clients, you know, which of those clients are actually key that warrant the additional time spent, because not every client's a growth client. We don't want to grow every client. The second, you know, as part of that strategy as well, it's how are we going to work with these particular clients differently? And that could be, you know, working more upstream with them, running quarterly business reviews, sitting at the top table with the client stakeholders and helping them plan their year, running masterclasses with our clients, really positioning ourselves as valuable. And also in terms of that strategy, it's making sure that we mitigate risk. And what I mean by that is sometimes I get people coming on my program and they've got this massive client with huge amount of growth opportunity, but they are the only person that has a relationship with that client account, right? It's so precarious. So when I talk about relationship risk, I also think, how can we spread that risk? It shouldn't be that one person is the single point of failure. because if they leave the business, the agency loses that account. So we also need to think about having some kind of ambassadorship where several members of the agency team have relationships with several members of the client stakeholders so that we're spreading the risk. So that's strategy. And that really has to be agreed. And similarly, where do we see that we can take this account? Do we have an aligned idea of how much potential growth there is there? And what's our strategy? How are we going to do that? Is it about asking for referrals? Is it about coming up with new ideas? Is it about talking to them about other services? That strategy is going to vary depending on that client. The second lever is the skills. So how can we equip the frontline people? Are they asking the right questions? Do they know how to propose ideas in a meaningful way that doesn't look salesy? Because clients, when you're proposing new ideas to a client, it's not just always about putting the positive business case forward. It's also about, what do they stand to lose if they don't go with this new idea that we're proposing? Maybe they're doing, I don't know, paid search with the agency. And you think, well, what are they doing with their paid social? Maybe we could talk to them about that. Well, what's the benefit? Who currently is doing that for them? Is anyone doing it for them? So there's so many different variabilities with coming up with, why they would choose you to do their paid social as well. How can we present that case to support their goals? Because, I use a lot of behavioral science in my training. And when our clients are deciding whether they go with this additional idea that you're presenting, it's not just about show me the numbers. It's also, I've got a fear of regret and blame. If this goes wrong, then so all of that kind of emotion is also part of this approach that we have to take in a meaningful way. And then the third lever, and I'll stop speaking in a minute because I've just done a monologue. The third lever is about how we can make this systematic. How can we develop a process internally? And part of that process is making sure that all the team members understand that account growth is part of their role as well. Because if the person on the front line spotting the opportunity to grow an account needs to come back to the wider team and develop a proposal, so they need to draw on the experiences with the wider team, then the wider team need to understand that that's a priority and also feel that it's part of their job and responsibility to support and come up with the ideas.
Yeah, because ultimately, like if you don't have that type of engagement, that's probably one of the places where you're going to start to see things kind of fall flat. Is you might have one person who's who's just like going after this, but if they don't have that structural support around them to really get engagement on the team, yeah, I can imagine that's going to lead to fizzling out.
Well, this is what I learned the hard way, right? So let me give you an example. I was working with an agency that was like an annual reporting agency, right? They did annual reports for these huge corporations. And as part of their agency offering, they also had sustainability consultants who would offer clients consultancy based on, how to have a more sustainable. So it was quite strategic. So these departments within the agency business were sought after. So the account management team were on the front line talking to their clients saying, as well as your annual reports, have you thought that, let's talk about your sustainability policy. Some of our other clients are finding it really valuable and useful because we're providing some insight into how other clients are approaching their policies and developing their sustainability strategies. This was such an easy sell. Okay. So the account manager was saying, brilliant, I've got all this new business. I've just grown this account because the client's just saying, yeah, absolutely. Invite me in. I want to know about what you offer in terms of this sustainability strategy. However, these consultants that were working behind the scenes were rammed with work. So there was this missed opportunity. So the account managers were coming back, but the sustainability consultants were saying, hey, you know, I'm busy enough as it is. So there was a blocker there. So when I talk about having a strategy that's agreed with the senior management team, the senior management team have to be able to look at their resource plan to ensure that they've got enough resource to support the account management strategy for growth. I hope that kind of illustrates the point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things I think we talk about in the fractional CFO space, especially for agencies, is like you can have all the growth in the world, but if you don't have proper resourcing, if you don't match the capacity with the revenue growth, like you're just in for so many issues. I mean, one of my favorite things that a friend of mine told me is he says agencies don't die from a lack of growth, or they said better. They said agencies don't die from starvation; they die from indigestion. It's this whole like lumpy experience of growth where it's like, I mean, your story was a great example of it. It's like account management was just knocking it out of the park, getting them tons of work, but they didn't have the ability to actually fulfill on it. And so here you have all this stuff in pipeline and you have no way to metabolize that. It's a recipe for failure.
Absolutely. Like that, I've got loads of different stories of blockages. And hence my approach now is this 3 levers, because you absolutely need to get the senior leadership team involved in order to support a proper account growth strategy that's going to work. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable.
That's totally right. So what I'm hearing you say strategy, skills, and systems. Those are kind of the 3 levers when you're talking about how you're managing your account management.
Exactly, because those systems will then create a culture of account growth, which is where you want to be. Because the silly things, Tony, like, you know, a lot of agencies ring the proverbial bell when they get a new client, but there's no kind of culture of celebration when you grow an existing account. It's just simply not on the radar. So how can you shift that so that we are making sure everyone in the agency understands that this is a priority? Because why wouldn't it be? When you go back to that leaky bucket and, you know, look at the numbers, financially, it just makes so much more sense.
Yeah. Oh, I want to go back to something you said in the strategy bucket. You said something that I think hopefully stood out to our listeners, but you said something about there may be some instances where you don't want to grow an account. Now, from my own experience, I know what I think that would look like, but could you dive a little deeper into that? What would you say would be indicators that maybe this account is not the right one for us to focus on?
So I think probably most agencies categorize their clients in some way, shape, or form. I think, and therefore their criteria is going to be slightly different in terms of who they want to work with and see any kind of future with. I think some of the considerations should be, is that client business growing? Are they in a fast growing sector? Are they opening new offices? Is it a healthy type of business that also can spend more money with you and the discipline that you offer? I think the other consideration when you're looking at choosing which clients to focus on is also how much revenue currently are they giving your agency? You know, ideally you want sort of less than 20% per client. I'm sure you've got your own criteria. That's kind of my rule of thumb. So many clients at many agencies, end up with a whale client. You know, they're typically called a whale. So it's maybe occupying 40, if not 50% of your overall revenue. Now you may decide, wow, that's really putting us in a risky position. Let's not focus our efforts there. Let's look to see what other clients we have and whether we can apply, you know, the same philosophy to grow these other clients. So those are a couple of things that I would say should be considered. The other thing is, you know, some agencies say they don't align with our values, or that, you know, they're horrible to work with. And quite frankly, we don't want them anymore because they're making our lives miserable. you know, every agency, as I say, is going to have their own criteria.
Mm.
In some cases, it's probably very obvious because as agencies evolve and develop and grow themselves, you know, I'm sure the client base that you started off your agency with are not the typical client, ideal client profile that you're looking to work with now. So lots of, so I mean, really, you want to look at this on an ongoing basis. It's not set and forget. I'm sure you say the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely want to keep that fresh, and you want to keep that top of mind. Yeah, strategies that are set for a year start to become stale after about, somewhat between 6 and 9 months. And so I think that's really good. And you mentioned, one of the other areas where companies or agencies may just naturally gravitate when they think about their account management strategy is around the core values fit. I think that one's been pretty well proliferated in the agency space. We want to work with the type of people that we like. But I do want to underscore the two things that you had said, two other examples of where it might make sense for us to do a little bit more consideration, or make a little bit more consideration in terms of our growth strategy, which is consider the growth of the business itself, of the client that you're serving. Are they a Dunder Mifflin? Right? If they're a Dunder Mifflin, they're in a dying industry as it is right now. You probably don't want to put your eggs in that basket. So the growth of that business and the market that they're in is a really important consideration when you think about, do I want to grow this or not? And then the other thing you said that just made me want to shout from the rooftops. I'm like, I'm glad other people are talking about this too. Customer concentration risk. So you say, 20%. Me, in my background and experience, technically customer concentration risk is anything that's 10% or above of your overall revenues, which I think, some people might hear that and they might say that is a very conservative approach, which I'm fine with saying that. It's okay for us to have a 15% of our revenues client, but just recognize it's technically a customer concentration risk. But that's so important that we recognize, right? Because like I even have an experience with one of my clients where 40 to 50% of the revenues was coming from one client. And sure enough, with all of the stuff that we saw happen in 2023 and 2024, what unfortunately happened for them is that client, their own contracts started to kind of dry up a little bit. And we saw a decrease in their overall revenues, and it was substantial. It had a very significant impact to the agency as a whole. And unfortunately, what happened for them is because they had so much customer concentration risk with this one account, what they didn't realize is most of the rest of their client acquisition system, their ability to bring in new revenue, was pretty atrophied, but they didn't recognize it because they had so much revenue from this one account. And so there's this false sense of security. So if anybody's listening to this right now and we're talking about customer concentration risk, I would just say, if you are in that spot and you have not yet had the instance where your 40 or 50% of your revenue coming from one account is starting to diminish, prepare yourself and really think about your strategy for growth going forward.
I think that's such a good piece of advice. I mean, and just to add to that, another example, what I referred to earlier about relationship risk, I mean, looking at how you're spreading the risk. Part of the role, I think, of a really commercially focused account manager or the person responsible for account growth needs to be around looking at the client business and how it's changing. I've got an example of one agency that I work with who at the time had between 35 and 40% of their overall revenue from one client. The team weren't keeping an eye on what was happening at the client's senior level. There was a change of CEO, and like any CEO that comes in, obviously is looking to make an impact either in, rapid growth or cutting costs. And it was the latter in this case. And one of the first things they did was look at their suppliers and actually issue an RFP. So the existing suppliers, of which my agency was one, had to reapply and repitch for the business. Now, that for the team came out of the blue, but it shouldn't really have done. I mean, I'm not saying that the outcome would have been different. However, they could have, if they'd, for example, had a closer relationship with the procurement team, procurement are very embedded with the C-suite, so they might have had a heads up. They could have been doing silly things like, following the CEO on LinkedIn. A lot of CEOs raise their profile on LinkedIn and do addresses. If you're working with an enterprise level client that's a PLC, you could be downloading the quarterly investor relations reports and looking at what's going on at the business level. So, I talk a lot about commercial acumen, and it goes back to, why aren't we doing this stuff? Because it takes time, but it's going to pay dividends.
I think it's an interesting idea, and I imagine for any agencies that are serving publicly traded companies, hopefully this is something they're doing. If they're not already doing this, I would second what you just said about reading the reports. I'd even go so far as to say on a quarterly basis, they do quarterly earnings calls, and I know that sounds incredibly boring, but I will just say those quarterly earnings calls, they're typically prepared statements followed by some Q&A time with analysts, and analysts tend to grill companies about what's going on in the business. So if you are serving a publicly traded company, especially here in the States, would definitely recommend listen to an earnings call here or there just to kind of get a sense for, like you're saying, what's going on in the business at a high level.
It's great to actually hear the CEO and the CFO. You can,
Yes.
I totally agree with you, Tony. And nowadays, with the likes of ChatGPT, you can download the kind of earnings call as a PDF, upload it to ChatGPT, ask it to summarize the information. I had a client, an agency that was experiential agency, and they were working with a drinks manufacturer, huge. I think it was Diageo or something like that. Currently, they were working in one market for one brand, and the account manager was looking at how could we grow our footprint within the company. And so that's what we ended up discussing, was the fact that they could download and I did it with them, and you can even get it to summarize, so look at your brand's performance versus another brand's performance. Are they growing in that market? Are they not? Could that be a cross-sell opportunity for us? And then you think, well, okay, statistically, there is some growth there with this other brand. That could be an opportunity. Then you start to think, well, who do I need to have a conversation with? Is it the procurement? Is it your brand manager to get an introduction? It starts the process of an account growth strategy.
What a great idea. As you were saying that about ChatGPT with the earnings call, I was like, why didn't I think of that? That's actually a really, really smart idea, because those earnings calls can be a little bit dry and somewhat lengthy, but that's actually a brilliant, brilliant idea. I want to go back to something that you had said earlier, though, is you're talking about, we were addressing the importance of account managers or people who are wearing the account manager hat having a good system and a good structure in place to ensure that they can really be successful with the account strategy, account growth strategy. And part of that involves executive buy-in and alignment at the highest level. So the agency owners, the managing partners, whoever those people might be. I'd love to get your insights on some key strategies that agency leadership can implement to ensure that their teams are aligned and focused on account growth. What are some of those that you can think of?
Well, when you're talking about managing the team, I think it's really important to manage the team's expectation about what you're expecting them to do, because, I've had all sorts of different experiences, but many account managers think, well, it's not in my job role. I'm more on the project management side and other players within the business. So is it written in their job description that this is part of their job? I know that might sound really basic, but this is what's coming up. And if it is in their role, have you co-created an account growth target with that individual so that they feel empowered to reach the target, rather than a top-down approach where you're saying, right, this is the account that needs to be grown, and we think that there's a 20% uplift potential. No, I'm a great believer that if you want to inspire your team to actually take action, they need to feel that the goal has been created with themselves. So that's the first thing. Then also performance reviews, again, to be aligned with supporting them in the growth of their account, which includes regular forecasting meetings, every fortnight, because a lot of people that come on my program that are responsible for account growth, remarkably, don't have any visibility over the agency's forecast. So they don't know what the overall growth target is, and also they don't have any kind of agency over what does a forecast look like? What are the known elements of my account growth plan? What are the probable elements, and what are the brand new elements? And I think that's important when you're thinking, when you're getting your team to think more commercially, because it's kind of like the short term projects. Well, they're going to happen. We've got the PO and it's all been agreed and it's going. But what is the next thing that I need to propose to the clients? And then what are the future things? Because so, for example, if you know that if you're on a project by project basis, I think forecasting is even more important than if you've got retainers, because you have to keep looking at how you're going to make that revenue more predictable. So forecasting is really, really essential, and thinking more long term. If, for example, last year a client worked with you on some kind of initiative, maybe it was an internal sales conference that you supported them with, then can we naturally assume that this year at the same time they'll be doing a similar thing? So the person managing that client relationship could be bringing that topic up in conversation proactively. So that's the kind of thinking that we want to foster within the business.
And that's what you as a leadership team want to be creating that culture of, is kind of this focus on account management. Now, what I'm hearing you say is, yeah, we want to make sure that our job descriptions are aligned, so there's a clear expectation in the job description itself. I think it's an excellent point. There's also, with performance reviews, there's also very clear visibility to how are you performing against some of these account management growth strategies. Am I understanding correctly that the job descriptions, the performance reviews, is that only applicable for people who are directly involved in account management? Or are you saying across the board, anybody and everybody in the organization should have some type of account growth metrics associated to their performance?
It's a really good question. I think it varies by agency. I think, if you're the agency owner, then it's up to you to decide who in your business should be responsible for growth. And it could be your senior leadership team. It could be your frontline account management team. It could be maybe people that have been in your business that are kind of legacy employees who have a natural propensity to grow accounts and actually love that part of their job. What we're not talking about here is fitting round pegs into square holes. Ideally, you also want that person to be the one that's pretty good on their feet. They're pretty good at walking the proverbial halls of client organizations, have that kind of agency services knowledge that they feel very comfortable talking about how else they could help to solve clients' marketing problems. I think there's not one size fits all. I think it's going to vary depending on the agency.
Yeah. Do you think that there are certain roles that, without having a clear goal and target for account growth, they will act as blockers to account management strategy?
Well, that's such a good question, Tony. And it kind of brings up, recent conversations, actually. I have these kind of conversations all the time because I typically train the person that's ultimately responsible for the growth and the target and the forecast. However, they are responsible for the strategy and for spotting the opportunities, but inevitably they have to come back to the business and leverage the experience of the wider team to help them develop ideas, come up with the right strategy. They might even be, the consultant that actually has to be introduced to the client. But if there's an unwillingness from the wider team to do that, then you've got a problem. It's another blocker. I mean, I could come up with a million types of blockers. This is one of them. So again, it points back to how you are leading that team culturally. Does everyone realize that this is actually a priority, that this is really important? Are we visibly celebrating success? And are we making sure that everyone understands that they play a role?
That's super important. I mean, in my own experience, not necessarily working with agencies, but definitely working in corporate world, I can see where when a leader does not make it clear that this is a priority, what you end up having is, well, this is the thing that I'm working on over here, and this is the thing I'm working on over here. And when account growth is in direct opposition to my pet project or my thing that I think is a priority, I got to imagine that's going to create a lot of friction, which is going to kind of undermine a lot of that really good strategy work and skills work you're talking about.
Exactly. I mean, if you want to think tactics, one agency I work with who sent all of their team through my program. So we had project managers, senior leaders. There was everyone from different parts of the business. The great thing was they all understood what was needed, for all the things that I've explained in order to grow an account. But what they were struggling with was, how can we make sure that as a senior leadership team, we are supporting those frontline people, having those conversations with the clients so that we can act quickly. Because if the client is expressing a need, we want to jump on that the same way you would for a prospect. You want to jump on that opportunity. So what they did was, because currently they wanted to know straight away and to be able to support that person, they created a dedicated Slack channel that was all about account growth. So whoever was having the client conversation where they'd uncovered an opportunity, their job was to quickly capture that in a Slack channel, which was monitored by the senior leadership ambassadors for each client. And then they were able to make contact with the account manager, or whoever it was that had the conversation, and say, right, let me support you in moving this opportunity forward.
It's a great idea to be able to provide a little bit more visibility and make it so that we're not just having one-off conversations, but we're doing it holistically as a team. I think, just from my own experience, one of my clients, I think, does this exceptionally well. They do it, I think, holistically in terms of they're looking at it both from existing accounts, but also like new accounts, but they have like an ongoing collaboration. And I think that's got to be so key. And do you typically, when you're seeing a channel like that, or some type of like cross pollination like that, is it with people even who aren't necessarily directly related to the account growth strategy or the account management piece of the business, or is it just account managers?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question fully, but what this particular agency did was assign client ambassadors. So those client ambassadors were account specific, and they were each member of the senior leadership team. So they divided the accounts by these ambassadors. So when you're talking about, making sure that the person that spotted the opportunity, it could have been a project manager, it could have been anyone, designer, they knew that their job was to spot the opportunity, and then that was celebrated. They came back to the Slack channel, and the ambassador would immediately be notified, and it was their job to then support that individual.
Got it.
That was how they then ensured that account growth was a priority for the business.
Got it.
And everyone understood, with the creation of this channel, that this is a priority. And then they started celebrating.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is those ambassadors kind of play that role. Maybe an ambassador isn't a dedicated account manager, but they are, somebody who's been given that responsibility to have a little bit more connection and make the relationship a little stickier. Those are the people that would then be looped into some of that kind of group discussion about how things are going with account management.
Yeah, I think the ambassadorship was a good idea because there was part of the senior leadership team. They were very embedded in ensuring that the agency was growing. I think from there, then you can pull in who else would be involved from the team. But they had the weight and the authority to make sure that things happened.
Got it. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Now, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. We didn't quite dive as deep as I'd like to, so I want to dive a little deeper now. Is we talked about when we're thinking about our growth strategy, sometimes we're going to come to a conclusion that, oh, this is actually not an account we want to grow. We want to maybe maintain it. But in some instances, our strategy actually is we need to wean down. We need to wean off of this particular client. So how should agencies approach the process of strategically letting go of clients?
So I think the first thing is it's thinking about an offboarding strategy. How are we going to do this painlessly and still come away friends? And the starting point really is to kind of diagnose, well, why do we want to offboard this client? Is it because they're a pain, or is it because they just don't fit our ICP anymore and it's a natural offboarding process? So I think the first thing, what's going to dictate the actions is really deciding why we're doing it. I mean, in the instance that they no longer are the typical client that we see our future with, there's nothing wrong. They just maybe, we've got to the limit of how much we can do for them. Then I think the key thing is to have a backup plan for them, to have maybe a referral partner that you can introduce them to, maybe a couple to give them that choice, and then also give them enough notification that this is going to happen. So, we're recording this in September, for example. If you feel that this is something you want to do, then, talk about next year. And that just perception-wise gives people enough time to think that they have an ability to work differently and have enough time to get everything in place. Because often, the agency's built up a lot of knowledge about their brand, about their client, stakeholders and how they work. So we don't want to think, oh yeah, you're going to be dropped like a stone next week. So give them enough time, give them enough notification, also a reason why you're doing it. And if you've just had an evaluation of your relationship, perhaps you can draw upon some of the feedback points that they've given you. If some of that feedback that you've received is the fact that they're not particularly happy, then you can also weave that in or draw on some of the points where you think it's no longer going to be the best fit for the company. But I think that's not illusion of choice, but I think you need to give people a choice but we've already got some partners who we think would be a perfect fit. We're going to facilitate that introduction. This is why we think that this is the right thing for you. So it's making about them really, but it's also about you.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you said what you said at the very beginning there. You said that you want to get out of this, or you want to be able to leave this and still remain friends. Because I think, that sounds very touchy-feely, but also you think about the importance of maintaining trust and reputation in this space. If you burn a client because it's like, well, they're not our ICP anymore, and you drop them like a rock, like you said, that's going to come back to you. It's going to come, because eventually they're going to talk with other people, and then that word's going to spread around. Oh, I had a really bad experience because of how they handled offboarding. So I think that's a really good point to make, that we think about account management. We've also, obviously we all know about client retention as a core fundamental of account management. What we've talked about here is account management as a growth driver, but there's also the element of, I think good account management also means good offboarding.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I would make sure that person had the right level of experience and was able to have a very delicate conversation empathetically. So you'll know, if you're an agency owner listening to this, whether you feel confident that person, because it is a precious relationship, and if that client does not feel that you've treated them well, it will come back to bite you, and it will bite you as the agency owner, not the person that's delivered the news. So I think it's really thinking delicately about how that conversation needs to unfold, and and how you position the reason, because it could simply be that your business is going in a different direction and that we can no longer serve the client's needs. I think it just needs to be thought about, because the story is going to probably be slightly different for each different client.
Yeah. And I mean, even just bringing to my mind a previous guest sharing his experience where they were, for a time, they were both an SEO and pay-per-click agency, and they had a web development component. They had it for a short period of time, but they wanted to incorporate that into their overall service offering. Well, lo and behold, for a number of reasons, they had to make the unfortunate decision to do away with the web development piece, and that's, it happens in these spaces. You try new things, you try new services, you realize we just can't serve these clients the way we wanted to. I mean, if I'm being honest with you, I tried it out in my firm. I was like, I want to do tax, and then I realized tax is not great. Not a fan of that.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that. You want to make sure that you're still doing right by your clients. You're still doing right by these people who they might not be clients anymore, but you want to treat them with, like you said, with empathy. We've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but would you mind just like calling out specific things that we should be avoiding in this offboarding conversation?
Well, that's a good question. What should you avoid? I think you've got to always feel that you don't want the client to end up feeling in fight or flight. And there's quite a lot of behavior science around this, actually. And I'm trying to remember the acronym, but you don't want them to feel like their ego has been bruised, and you'll also know your client and hopefully their preferred communication style. So what kind of, DISC, I think I like DISC as a ground, working out what kind of style they are. Because, for example, an S, who's a steady relator, is going to be very much about collaboration and team and support. And, and they probably will want a more touchy-feely approach to the relationship than perhaps a D, who's very sort of quick results, get it done, very driven. So I think it's having that in mind when you're approaching these different clients, thinking about their kind of communication style. Don't do it over email or text, obviously, because this is such a delicate conversation. So make sure, ideally, you do it face to face, because I think that's also goes a long way. Like, even if the client is perhaps in another county or another, get on a plane and actually have the conversation, because I think that also goes a long way. The fact that you've invested the time and the effort shows that this is important, and you feel it's important to make sure the client feels okay. I think those two things are really key. What else? Try not to make it about you. Think about what ultimately are the three key things of why it works for the client and not you. It goes back to that trustworthiness equation, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah. And I think, I loved how you're framing this. You're talking about this. I mean, at the end of the day, a big part of it is just like having a good emotional intelligence about how you approach the conversations. I mean, even what you're talking about with like, consider their own communication style when you go to have a conversation. If somebody is more of that supporter type, I'm thinking about it in the frame of not DISC, but insights discovery. It's like that. What is it? Red, yellow.
There's a few of them, isn't there?
Yes. Yep. They're all basically the same thing. But anyway, but I'm thinking about like, somebody who's like fiery red, they're gonna have a very different communication style or desire to receive that communication in a different way than somebody who's green. They might need a little bit more. It might need to be a longer conversation. It might need to be something where you're helping them to come to that conclusion on their own, kind of thing. It's kind of like letting them off easy, like breaking up with them, very kindly. But
and also, Tony, like, if it might be a dinner conversation, conversation over dinner, or it could be a very formal, detailed, going with a plan and a spreadsheet for them because they're a C and they don't particularly like the informal part of the relationship. and all the social networking, they're very introverted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everyone has, like you said, it's using your emotional intelligence to really work it out.
Yeah, that is so good. Well, I want us to cover one more topic because I think it'll be really applicable for what we're talking about here, and that has to do with in the account management space, playing the role of a challenger. This is harkening all the way back to my conversation with Max Trailer, where he's talking about basically how you can avoid being vendorified, and with that comes just a need to be on equal footing with your client. And the second you start to find yourself as just being an order taker, or just kind of like you've been put into the box of vendor, um, a lot of times your outcomes diminish as well, because they're not looking at you as a trusted advisor. And you've mentioned this. You mentioned it in your training. You mentioned it in a conversation as well. But the importance that when somebody is in account management role, that they are an effective challenger. Would you mind unpacking that a little bit more? Like why do you think that that's important?
I think it's important because of the role that the account management plays in account growth. Like we said before, if you want to grow an account, you need to be seen as business relevant. In order to be seen as business relevant, you need to show up asking the right questions and take the time to understand the client's business, their customers, their market, what the opportunities are. Then you need to be speaking their language. So I think being a challenger encompasses all of that. And I think the starting point actually is when you're prospecting, how you show up in the sale is often how you're treated, when you're managing the client business. So thinking about, the new business team, if that's the agency owner, like if they are, going into a sales conversation, or a prospecting situation where they are accepting all of the client's terms and they are kind of discounting stuff. I mean, I know this is probably not, but you get the gist. Then how the account manager then manages the client relationship. The client, you've kind of set the bar in terms of how the client can treat you. So I think it does start early. And apart from that, I think the key point where you can show up as a challenger is when you're looking for new growth opportunities. Agencies sell business outcomes ultimately. They don't buy process, they buy outcomes. So what are those outcomes that they want to achieve? Are we really drilling down and asking the right questions? You've come to me with, there's a podcast episode where I interview 2 account managers that work in a digital marketing agency. And Emma, the account manager, was talking about the time she went into a client came to her and he said, look, I've got 20 minutes to talk about this. I just want 2 testimonial videos, kind of get on with it. But she stood her ground and she said, well, that's fine. Thanks for coming to us with this opportunity. But actually, what are you trying to achieve with these testimonials? Talk to me a bit about the background. What have you tried before? Like, why now? Why do you need these? And through this series of questions, not only did she discover that that wasn't the best solution, but he also ended up spending like over an hour on the phone with her. I've only got 20 minutes, but actually her showing up in that way. Now, I'm not saying that that's always possible, but I do think that point at which the client does need something is our opportunity to behave in a different way as a challenger, rather than how quickly do you need this done?
Right. Well, and it's yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just no. It's not to say also, and I know this is going to sound a bit convoluted, some clients, no matter what you do, want you in that order taker bucket. Okay. So when people are listening to this say, oh, that's all well and good, but that's what the client wants. I get that. And that is a case as well. Only you will know who you have the opportunity to do this with.
Yeah, that's very true. And arguably, maybe when we talk about account growth strategy, you might find that we're looking for the types of clients that are looking for or prize the challenger, strategic partner position, not ones that are going to put us in a vendor bucket. But I love the example you give here, because I think oftentimes you can hear the term challenger and you can immediately like envision somebody who's like, ready for a fist fight, somebody
Yeah.
who's like aggressive. And even in something like that, you can be a really, really powerful challenger by just asking questions. And what it does is you reject the premise that what the client or the prospect is coming to you with is exactly what it is that they actually want. And I mean, this as well as I do. I've seen this in many calls that I have had, prospective client calls that I have had. Most of the time, they think they know what they want for the most part, but what they actually want is something very different from what they originally came to you with.
Absolutely. It's your opportunity to demonstrate that you are an expert in what you do, that you do this all the time. You've seen these patterns before and you get it. Otherwise, if you're just saying, how quickly do you need this done and by when, it's a missed opportunity.
Very, very true. Well, Jenny, I appreciate all that we have had a chance to dive into. I know that you have a program that you take your clients through. You got some training that you do. I'm thinking, people listening to this, hopefully it's piqued their interest. I see a ton of value in the type of training and the equipping that you do. Where could people go to find out a little bit more about what you're doing in training on account management?
Sure. I mean, you can go to my website, accountmanagementskills.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn, Jenny Plant, and you can talk to me about the different solutions that I offer in terms of programs. Thank you, Tony, as well. Thank you for allowing me to talk about what I do.
I love it. Well, and I know I've learned a ton from you in this, and hopefully our listeners have as well. If people are wanting to just kind of follow along, do you post on Instagram? Are you on LinkedIn? Like, where's your socials?
Yes, LinkedIn is probably the one I spend most time on, to be honest. I do have a YouTube channel, but it's more like a depository of videos, of podcast videos. Obviously, I have my podcast, which is Creative Agency Account Manager Podcast. And that has a back catalogue of, I think we're at over 120 episodes now. So there's lots of different, you can literally look at what topics stands out for you in terms of where you're at right now. But that's also, and I also have a weekly newsletter that you can sign up to on my website as well.
Awesome. Well, I would highly recommend our listeners go and check all of that out. Again, I know you will learn a lot. Account management, I think, is something that we don't talk a lot about. We certainly don't talk a lot about it in the software development agency space. More broadly, I think it's probably an underserved area. So I'm glad that you are educating us on this and you continue to kind of carry the torch. Account management is one of the greatest ways to continue to grow your agency in a sustainable and in a healthy way, for a much lower customer acquisition cost, if I might add in there too. But yes, Jenny, thank you again so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you so much, Tony. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value in our episode today, please leave us a review and tell your friends about us. If you're interested in being a guest on our show as a digital agency owner, or maybe somebody with insights that can help digital agencies grow, head over to our website to learn more at acquip.com/podcast guest. That's ACCQUIP.com/podcast guest.